you go to any traditional Hanafi madrasa, they have to study this book. Like, if they don't study Hidayah, like you don't finish your alim course, because you're not even like, especially if you become a mufti and you didn't study this book, nobody's going to trust you. This is that fundamental. Each of the four madhab, they have their own book. So maybe if the Shaykh wants, maybe tomorrow we'll cover Al-Mudawwana, which is the Islamic fiqh. The book Imam Shafi'i, it's also a fundamental book. MashaAllah. We have a Risala, which is Usul al-Fiqh from Imam Shafi'i, which is different, but that's also there. And then moving from the Hanabila, the Hanbali madhab is also a very fundamental book in that madhab. So each of them they have their very fundamental books that cannot give the aphorisms or the main methodologies of the madhab is there, and many systems of Allah are derived from that. And the other thing why I want to mention is fiqh is because it humbles ourselves, like I mentioned, because we didn't do anything, but the knowledge is already there. Right? That look how much work the scholars of the past did for us. Right? They codified, they organized, they wrote the summary of summary. They did everything for us, right? Now it's just to try to follow the best we can. That's all we have to do. So let's talk about, first of all, what are the Hanafi madhab, what are like the origins, the basics, Like, where does this madhab, where does it take, like which Sahaba does it predominantly follow, for example? Right? And of the major is Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. Abdullah bin Mas'ud was, in one narration they say, like the sixth to accept Islam. His story of conversion is very beautiful. That's your homework, inshallah, you can look it up, how he converted to Islam. But he was very early converted to Islam, very early. And he was there in the whole Meccan time period, Madani time period. And he ended up having a great knowledge and interpretation of the Quran, so much so that he's mentioned from himself that he studied 70 surahs directly from the mouth of the Prophet. Imagine you have Quran teachers, imagine your Quran teacher is the Prophet. 70 surahs directly, he said, like fresh from the mouth, right? That he studied from the Prophet. So the Prophet said, whoever wants to have whoever wants to have the proper recitation, who wants to study the Quran as it was revealed to me, they should go to Ibn Mas'ud. And there's another hadith here where they mentions that the closest in guidance, demeanor, and character to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was Ibn Mas'ud. That's in Tirmidhi. So these are the closest companions, and not only was he very high in his level of Quran and his interpretation of it, but his fiqh and understanding was very high as well, to be able to understand laws and such and such. And the Sahaba, they would send their students over to Ibn Mas'ud a lot. Ibn Mas'ud, after the Islam spread, right, it went to many areas, it ended up in Iraq, right, in Kufa. And so Ibn Mas'ud, he resided in Kufa for the majority of the time, and Kufa became, actually in the time of Ali, the capital moved to Kufa over there. So it became a very predominant area for knowledge. And Ibn Mas'ud, he made the whole city. When Umar ibn Khattab, I believe, is the one who sent him to Kufa. He saw the city after what Ibn Mas'ud did to the city, right? And look at all the knowledge spread about. Very impressed, right? Look how Ibn Mas'ud has changed the city. So Ibn Mas'ud is one of those companions with great high intellectual capacity, great understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah, and he resided in Kufa, the school of Kufa. Kufa is it?
Iran.
So if we look at the chain, you have Prophet ﷺ, obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Prophet ﷺ, Abdullah bin Mas'ud, and there were some other major people in the Hanafi Sahaba, meaning the major companions that the law is derived from. For example, Ali ibn Abi Talib, radiallahu anhu. But the main chain, because there's people in between Abu Hanifa and Ibn Mas'ud, right? Who is in between here? And I'll just read the chain over here. We studied this when we went to Dar al-Salam in the winter. That it was Prophet ﷺ, Abdullah bin Mas'ud, and of his best student. And by the way, each of these are their best students. Like they would say that if you miss the halaqah of Abdullah bin Mas'ud, you can catch the halaqah of Al-Qam and you will be good. Right? They would resemble their teacher so much. that they knew the knowledge and they were able to comprehend the law so well, and comprehend the knowledge so well. So each of them was their like best student, their most favored, their most honored. Like each of them would even, like when the teacher praises you, that's something like very special, right? It's something when, the students get praised from, their students, but when the teacher does it, it's a different type of, man, you're a special one. And so each of them are like this. So the Prophet ﷺ, he himself praised Allah Mas'ud, right? These are all teachers of one another. This is how the deen comes down to us. Prophet ﷺ, Allah Mas'ud, then Al-Qama ibn Qais, and then Ibrahim al-Nakhari, and then his student Hamad ibn Ali Sulaiman, and then his student Abu Hanifa, rahmatullah. Okay. So again, Prophet ﷺ, Allah Mas'ud, Al-Qama ibn Qais, Ibrahim al-Nakhari, Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman, and then Abu Hanifa. Abu Hanifa was born about 80 Hijri. And so, some say he was a Tabi, some say he was a Tabi'i. But the point is, he was born very, very early, and he has met very senior of the Salaf. I mean, he is of the Salaf, but he's met very senior of the Salaf, right? And he has major students as well. And it's not like some would say, he has no knowledge of Hadith. He has some knowledge, right? So, I mean, we learned that he himself knew about 3,000, 4,000 narrations to the Prophet ﷺ, which is compared to some other scholars who may know, it's a light amount. I mean, we don't know ourselves 2 or 3, but this is like something he was also. But he was a faqih, and he was a faqih. Like he was so knowledgeable in his fiqh. Like even Imam Shafi'i said, I believe that like you will not be able to understand fiqh if you don't if you don't understand. Or I will not butcher the quote, but major scholars have understood as consensus that he is a faqih. Everybody agrees. Nobody's going to disregard, nobody's going to say he's not a faqih. And he had major students, right? Qadi Abu Yusuf, Zubayr ibn Khudayb, and Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani. So there are many students, and the reason I wanted to mention these students especially is because, think about it, the law is not going to be kept and preserved had Imam Abu Hanifa not had the resources of students around him. Not just these 3, but there's like 40 other judges, many major students that he had. And had he not had students, for example, what happened to all the other madhahib, right? Like I was mentioning earlier. And without the students to surround you, to teach you, that you put in them the law and you allow them to understand the methodology of the madhab, the way will not be preserved. And those other madhab, they all died out. Now there's only these main 4. Why? Because the students were able to codify, preserve, and maintain everything to the point that we're talking about Hidayah, big manual, Hanafi fiqh, everything there, right? And even more knowledge nowadays is derived from the principles that are made in Hidayah. So Hidayah has principles of fiqh, of Hanafi fiqh, and if you're trying to make new laws coming up nowadays, modern day, you'll have to look back at the principles that are derived, and those principles come from even other works came earlier. So everything is in place as it is, and that's why it's important to understand the students of these people, because everything is put in place. And for example, Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, he wrote 6 major books of understanding Hanafi fiqh, and actually one of them is what Imam Marghimani based off like the commentary of. So Hidayah was a commentary of one of his other books, and then that book was based on 2 other Ahnaf's books, and one of them was Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani. And he wrote 6 major books. I won't mention them now, but they are very, very fundamental foundation books in the Hanafi method. But we're talking about Hidayah now. So Hidayah is, like I said, the primary compendium of Hanafi fiqh. And you will not become a mufti, you will not understand Hanafi fiqh really if you don't study this book. And so principled and authoritative it is. It's an authoritative work for other commentaries. There's been dozens of commentaries of Hidayah, let alone, because it's the primary book. But then, like, I can't imagine how many other works that try to interpret this, right, at a modern lens, interpretations in English to try to translate it to Urdu. I mean, think about it, this madhab is the most common madhab in the entire world. Hanafi madhab is having the most population, right? So this book is that essential. And like I mentioned, that is based on his own book. And he read his own book. So the full name of Hidayah is Al-Hidayah Bisharh Hidayah Al-Mubtadi. So Hidayah Al-Mubtadi, that's his other book. Hidayah is a commentary of that book. Imagine you wrote a book and you're like, you know what, that's too complicated, let me make a commentary of that. That's what happened, right? And that book, Hidayah Al-Mubtadi, that's based off other books from scholars from earlier. So those two scholars are Imam Qutri, his Mukhtasar, and I talked about him earlier, Imam Muhammad bin Hassan Shaybani, his book, which one of his 6 books, which is Jami' as-Saghir. So look how the knowledge has passed down, and commentaries become summarized, and that has become summarized. And now look, we can just have a nice little thing on our phone. Here's the basic manual of Hanafi fiqh. Here you go. Right? Look at that, how easy it's come to us. So this is the main point I wanted to say here, that let us appreciate how complex, I really can't imagine you're trying to sort out the narrations of the Prophet. Because by the way, when we look at the madhab, it's not possible for a madhab to be against the sunnah, right? The whole point is to do what? What is the whole point of the madhab? To interpret, to have a methodology of interpreting Quran and Sunnah, right? It's not like they don't know these narrations exist. That's why there's generations of scholarship, right? They have, we just talked about 500 now. The name is 500 after Hijrah. You don't think he knows about Bukhari and Muslim? Right? He knows about these books. He knows. Trust me, he knows. So subhanAllah, look how the law has come down, and the madhab, they interpret the methodology of interpreting the Quran and Sunnah. And the 4 main madhabs, they've preserved their methodologies of the Quran and the Sunnah, and they have lasted until this day. Alhamdulillah. And if time permits, and the Shaykh would like to, maybe he'll speak about Maliki tomorrow. Maybe one of our brothers will speak about Shafi'i fiqh. Maybe one of our brothers will speak about Hanbali fiqh. Right? The point is to appreciate the knowledge that's come down. And actually, we learned that the ikhtilaf is not division. Some will think it's division, but it's actually not. It's actually a rahmah, because you think about how Allah allows for so many interpretations for the fiqh, which is in a valid sense, right? These are the valid disagreements of the pious of the past, and you can see it's a rahmah because this is allowed, right? From the scholars of this methodology's opinion, and this is also allowed, right? So this is why the ikhtilaf in this way is a rahmah for us, and we can't see it always in such a stringent manner that, why don't you do this? Why don't you do this? Everything is in its place, and everything. It's not like they're neglecting this hadith. You know what exists, but they just prefer another evidence over that. And the scholars know most definitely more than us. Alhamdulillah. And the last thing I wanted to mention is just with this, we feel so humble in front of these type of things. But let us try to seek knowledge. Let us try to understand how this knowledge has come about. Like I said, we should appreciate but also pursue the knowledge. We should try our best to not be amongst those who are ignorant in these type of things. Because as soon as, you're jahil in these type of things, that's when shaitan comes in, and then we start making fun of people. That's when shaitan comes in, and then we start blurting out things which are random. So let us try to become knowledgeable. And it's also a reminder to, like I said, pursue knowledge. Especially firstly the Quran, it's the month of Ramadan. How many of us try to understand, first of all, the understanding the translation of the Quran, even just looking at the basic Arabic. But more than that, tajweed, right? Knowing how to recite it properly. Basic things, we should try to seek knowledge. These are great scholars, We're probably not going to be able to reach their level. But let us at least try to fulfill our commitments to our deen. Let us at least try to read the Quran properly. Let us at least try to do the things that are required of us. The knowledge that we need, the basic fiqh that we need. What is the basic fiqh of Tahara? What is wajib for me in my wudu? You don't know that, it's like a loss on your part, right? These are mandatory things for us, Right? How do you perform this? How do you perform that? Very important. Very important. So it's a reminder for us to let us try our best. Even if we're not going to study Hidayah, I cannot study Hidayah. Personally, I can't. I'm not at that level. I cannot. I have to start. So read a small book, like I said, full manual, right? I can't. Even then, I need to have a a teacher to help me out. Because we'll may get lost, right? So may Allah allow us to understand. May Allah allow us to be amongst those who are not amongst the ignorant ones. May Allah allow us to be amongst those of the knowledgeable ones. Allahumma ameen. May Allah grant us that knowledge which is most beneficial and most pleasing to Him. May Allah allow us to act upon the knowledge that we learn. And may Allah forgive us in this great month of Ramadan and allow us to truly take advantage of this blessed month. Allahumma ameen. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون. وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم.